They say avoidant people run from love, but what if that's not the full truth? What if the real issue isn't that they don't want connection, but that most connection is built in a way that quietly triggers their deepest fears? Because beneath the distance, beneath the silence, and beneath the emotional withdrawal, there is something most people completely miss: a hidden psychological world driven by fantasies they never openly admit, and often don't even realize they have. And once you understand those inner patterns, you start to see something very different. You stop chasing them the wrong way, and you start realizing what actually makes an avoidant not just stay, but become deeply, intensely drawn to someone without even fully understanding why. The real question is not how to get their attention. It's how to become what their unconscious mind has been looking for all along. The avoidant attachment style is driven by a deep and often unconscious inner world made up of fantasies that shape who they are drawn to, even when they cannot explain it themselves. On the surface, they may believe they value space, independence, and emotional distance above all else, but underneath that conscious narrative exists a very different set of psychological needs. These hidden fantasies are rooted in early emotional wounds and unresolved experiences, and they quietly influence attraction in powerful ways. When someone unknowingly aligns with these inner patterns, the avoidant's usual defenses begin to weaken. What creates the strongest pull is not pressure or pursuit, but the ability to match what their unconscious mind is actually searching for while bypassing the fear that normally shuts them down. In many cases, their conscious preferences and unconscious desires are in direct contradiction, which is why their attraction patterns often seem confusing or inconsistent from the outside. At their core, avoidants often fantasize about a kind of connection that does not threaten their autonomy. They are drawn, in a deeply unconscious way, to people who feel emotionally steady and internally complete, not dependent on external validation or constant reassurance. This comes from their fear of being overwhelmed by emotional demands or becoming responsible for someone else's stability. So, when they encounter a person who appears grounded, self-contained, and not easily shaken by distance or silence, something shifts internally. It creates the impression that closeness might be possible without the emotional pressure they instinctively resist. The key here is not performance, but authenticity. The avoidant can quickly detect emotional pretense, so only genuine stability creates attraction. A person who remains centered regardless of shifting attention, who does not collapse into anxiety when the connection becomes unclear, and who continues living a full emotional life independently, becomes uniquely compelling to them. This emotional self-sufficiency is not about acting detached or playing hard to get. In fact, forced independence often has the opposite effect, because avoidants are highly sensitive to inconsistency between behavior and emotional truth. What they respond to is someone who does not rely on the relationship to regulate their inner state. When attention is present, they are appreciative. When it is absent, they remain unaffected and continue their life without emotional disruption. This creates a sense of safety for the avoidant because it removes the fear of emotional entanglement or pressure. It also activates a deeper fantasy, being chosen freely rather than being needed out of desperation. To them, being needed feels like responsibility and pressure, but being chosen by someone who could comfortably exist without them feels like genuine connection. That distinction becomes psychologically powerful because it reframes intimacy as a voluntary experience rather than an obligation they must manage or escape from. Another layer of their unconscious attraction is the pull toward mystery and depth. Avoidants are not typically drawn to people who reveal everything too quickly or make themselves fully predictable from the beginning. Instead, they are intrigued by individuals who carry complexity, inner depth, and a sense of gradual unfolding. This is not about manipulation or emotional games, but about having a rich internal world that cannot be immediately decoded. When someone has their own interests, emotional layers, and personal direction that is not centered around the avoidant, it creates curiosity rather than pressure. The avoidant begins to engage mentally, trying to understand and explore rather than withdraw. This slow unfolding feels safer to them because it allows intimacy to develop at a controlled pace, without overwhelming their nervous system or triggering their instinct to retreat. This sense of mystery works because it mirrors their own internal experience. Avoidants often feel complex on the inside but struggle to express it openly, so they are naturally drawn to people who reflect a similar depth. However, the attraction only lasts when it feels stable and non-intrusive. The moment curiosity turns into pressure or emotional demand, the system shuts down again. What sustains their interest is a balance between accessibility and independence, where connection is possible but never forced. This creates a psychological space where they can approach without feeling trapped. Ultimately, the strongest unconscious fantasy in the avoidant mind is not just about independence or mystery, but about safe connection. A connection where they are not consumed, controlled, or emotionally burdened, yet still feel genuinely chosen and understood. When someone embodies emotional stability, personal depth, and non-needy presence consistently, they become a reflection of what the avoidant has been searching for without realizing it. And in that space, their usual defenses soften, and the desire to move closer becomes stronger than the instinct to pull away. The avoidant doesn't experience attraction in the simple, direct way people often assume. Instead, their desire system is shaped by unconscious patterns that respond more to emotional dynamics than to surface-level traits. On a deeper level, they are not looking for someone who is fully revealed from the start, but someone who feels like an ongoing experience of discovery. When a person is too immediately accessible, too emotionally transparent, or too quickly available, the avoidant mind loses curiosity. But when someone has layers, personal boundaries, private routines, and an inner world that is not instantly handed over, it creates a sense of intrigue. They begin to engage slowly, as if they are piecing together something meaningful over time. That gradual unfolding keeps their attention alive far longer than instant familiarity ever could. This sense of mystery is not about emotional distance for its own sake, but about maintaining a healthy separation between two lives. The avoidant is often drawn to people who are not emotionally merged with them, who still have their own friendships, interests, decisions, and priorities that exist independently. When someone doesn't immediately adjust their entire world around the avoidant, it creates a subtle but powerful tension. Instead of feeling pursued or managed, the avoidant feels like they are engaging with someone who has their own direction. That autonomy becomes attractive because it removes the pressure of emotional responsibility and instead replaces it with curiosity. They are not being handed attachment. They are being invited into someone else's life on equal footing. Within this dynamic, challenge plays an important role, but not in the sense of conflict or resistance. The avoidant is not drawn to chaos or emotional confrontation. What pulls them in is someone who doesn't automatically conform, someone who holds their own perspective without needing approval or constant agreement, a person who can disagree calmly, make independent decisions, and prioritize their own needs when necessary, creates a kind of grounded tension that keeps the connection alive. It signals strength without aggression, presence without neediness. This balance is important because it allows the avoidant to stay engaged intellectually and emotionally without feeling cornered or controlled. Another key layer of this attraction is the feeling that affection must be earned rather than instantly given away. When someone is overly available or immediately emotionally invested, it can unconsciously trigger suspicion in the avoidant mind. They may interpret it as imbalance or emotional dependency, which they instinctively avoid. But when connection develops gradually, when attention, trust, and warmth are built through consistency rather than instant intensity, it feels more meaningful and stable. Effort, in this sense, becomes a form of emotional validation. It suggests that the connection has weight, not desperation. At a deeper level, the avoidant also carries a hidden longing for what can be described as a non-judgmental witness. This is the fantasy of being fully seen without being corrected, reshaped, or emotionally pressured. On the surface, they often present themselves as self-reliant and composed, but internally, there is a part of them that hopes someone will understand the reasons behind their distance without taking it personally. They want their need for space to be interpreted as regulation, not rejection. When someone can respond with calm understanding instead of emotional protest, it creates a powerful sense of safety. It tells the avoidant that connection does not automatically lead to pressure or emotional demand. This acceptance extends beyond just handling distance. It also includes recognizing the avoidant's quieter ways of expressing care. Rather than expecting constant verbal affirmation or emotional disclosure, this kind of partner notices consistency, actions, and subtle forms of presence. They understand that affection for an avoidant may look less expressive, but is still real. By not forcing emotional expression into a standard mold, they remove the sense of evaluation that the avoidant often feels in relationships. Without that pressure, the avoidant can relax into connection instead of defending against it. There is also a deeper emotional layer here, the need to be seen as fundamentally acceptable despite their relational struggles. Many avoidants carry an internal conflict about their difficulty with closeness. They may fear that something about them is inherently flawed in how they attach. A person who can see beyond this surface, struggle, and still recognize their capacity for loyalty, care, and depth becomes deeply significant. It is not about ignoring their patterns, but about understanding them without judgment. That understanding removes shame, and in the absence of shame, defensiveness begins to soften. This leads into another core fantasy, the secure base. At an unconscious level, the avoidant often longs for a presence that feels stable, predictable, and emotionally steady. Not someone who demands constant closeness, but someone who remains available without pressure. This creates a foundation where distance does not equal punishment and space does not equal loss. When someone responds to withdrawal with patience instead of anxiety, it communicates emotional safety. The avoidant learns that they can move closer and farther without destabilizing the relationship, which gradually reduces their need for constant self-protection. A secure base is not only emotional but also behavioral. Consistency, reliability, and follow-through matter deeply. When a person keeps their word, remains steady in their actions, and does not introduce unnecessary emotional volatility, it signals trustworthiness. This kind of stability allows the avoidant nervous system to relax over time, because predictability reduces the need for hypervigilance. Instead of preparing for emotional disruption, they begin to experience the relationship as something safe to approach gradually. What makes this fantasy powerful is that it removes urgency from intimacy. There is no pressure to accelerate emotional closeness or meet expectations that feel overwhelming. Instead, connection becomes something that unfolds naturally, at a pace that feels internally manageable. The avoidant is free to step forward, pause, or retreat without fear of emotional consequences. That freedom paradoxically makes them more willing to engage, because they no longer feel trapped by the relationship dynamic. At the center of all these layers, mystery, autonomy, acceptance, and stability, is a consistent theme. The avoidant is drawn to relationships where closeness does not come at the cost of control over their own emotional state. When someone embodies that balance naturally, not as a strategy but as a way of being, the connection stops feeling threatening and starts feeling possible. The avoidance attraction system is deeply shaped by unconscious expectations around independence, competence, and emotional safety. One of their strongest inner fantasies is that of an equal partner, someone who is not looking to them for direction, validation, or meaning in life, but instead already has a clear sense of identity and purpose. This comes directly from their fear of becoming emotionally responsible for another person's stability or choices. So when they encounter someone who is already building a meaningful life of their own, it creates a very different kind of attraction. Instead of feeling pressure, they feel respect. Instead of sensing dependency, they sense compatibility. The connection begins to feel like a meeting of two complete individuals rather than a merging of needs. To activate this dynamic, what matters most is visible self-direction. This includes having personal ambitions, long-term goals, and meaningful pursuits that exist outside of the relationship. The avoidant is naturally drawn to people who are actively engaged in their own growth, whether through career development, creative projects, learning, or personal achievements. Not because these accomplishments are impressive in a superficial sense, but because they signal psychological independence. A person who is already invested in their own life does not feel like an emotional burden waiting to happen. They feel like a partner who adds value through presence rather than dependence. This equal partner fantasy also depends heavily on intellectual and emotional balance. The avoidant is not drawn to superiority or submission, but to mutual respect. They want someone whose mind they can engage with, someone whose opinions feel thoughtful, grounded, and worth considering. In this kind of dynamic, there is stimulation without threat. The interaction feels expansive rather than constricting. Instead of feeling evaluated or pressured, the avoidant feels mentally engaged, as if the relationship is opening up new ways of thinking rather than demanding emotional performance. This creates a sense of admiration that strengthens attachment without triggering defensiveness. Another important layer of this fantasy is social independence. The avoidant is more comfortable when their partner has a life that does not revolve around them. Friendships, family connections, and external social activities all signal that the person is not emotionally isolated or dependent on the relationship for fulfillment. This removes the subtle pressure that often triggers avoidance, being the sole source of someone's emotional or social stability. When that pressure is absent, the avoidant can participate in the relationship without feeling trapped or over-responsible. Practical and financial independence also contributes to this sense of equality. When both people are capable of managing their own responsibilities and contributing fairly, it prevents the emergence of power imbalances. The avoidant is highly sensitive to dynamics that feel like obligation, debt, or emotional entanglement through dependency. An equal contribution model creates clarity instead of hidden pressure. It allows the relationship to function as a choice rather than a responsibility they must carry. Alongside the equal partner fantasy is another important dimension: the adventure companion. Here, the avoidant is drawn to someone who enjoys exploration, novelty, and experience, but without turning every moment into emotional processing or relational analysis. They want shared experiences that feel light, engaging, and alive: travel, learning, discovery, or simple novelty, without constant pressure to interpret or deepen the emotional meaning of everything happening. The connection is strongest when presence in the moment is prioritized over constant relational evaluation. To embody this, a person naturally shows curiosity toward life itself. They pursue interests, hobbies, and growth independently, not as a way to impress the avoidant, but because they are genuinely engaged with the world. This internal motivation is what makes the attraction feel real rather than constructed. The avoidant is highly sensitive to authenticity, and they can distinguish between lived independence and performed independence very quickly. Only the former sustains their interest. Within this dynamic, the ideal companion is also low maintenance during shared experiences. This does not mean emotionally absent, but rather not dependent on constant reassurance, check-ins, or relational processing during every interaction. The focus remains on the experience itself rather than turning every moment into an evaluation of the relationship. This creates space for ease, which is something avoidants rarely experience in emotionally intense dynamics. The adventure companion also brings their own direction into the relationship. They suggest ideas, introduce new experiences, and contribute actively rather than passively following. This reinforces the sense of equality and prevents the avoidant from feeling like they are carrying the emotional or experiential weight of the connection alone. Instead of being responsible for the relationship's momentum, they are participating in something shared and naturally evolving. Underlying all of these fantasies is a crucial reality. None of this can be faked in a sustainable way. The avoidant is highly perceptive of inconsistency between behavior and internal state. Attempts to perform independence, mystery, or emotional stability without genuine grounding tend to collapse under pressure. What actually creates attraction is authentic development, becoming someone who is emotionally regulated, internally directed, and comfortable with both closeness and space. Timing and consistency also matter. These qualities are not meant to be displayed as strategies, but revealed gradually through behavior over time. The avoidant tends to trust what remains stable under changing conditions. They observe how someone responds when attention shifts, when distance increases, or when emotional intensity fluctuates. Consistency in those moments communicates safety far more strongly than any deliberate presentation ever could. Ultimately, the value of embodying these traits extends far beyond attracting a specific attachment style. Emotional independence, intellectual depth, stability, equality, and curiosity are not tactics. They are markers of psychological maturity. When developed genuinely, they improve every type of relationship, not just romantic ones. The focus shifts from trying to influence someone's attachment system to becoming a more grounded, complete individual. In that sense, the real outcome is not control or manipulation of attraction, but the creation of conditions where healthy connection becomes possible. When two emotionally self-directed people meet with mutual respect, curiosity, and stability, the relationship stops being driven by fear and starts being shaped by choice. At the end of it all, what becomes clear is this: the avoidant mind is not absent of desire, and it is not incapable of love. It is simply structured around protection, control, and emotional safety above everything else. What looks like distance is often a system trying to avoid overwhelm, not connection itself. And beneath all the layers of independence, mystery, equality, acceptance, and stability, there is one consistent truth running through every fantasy: the need for connection that does not feel like pressure, a bond that does not demand surrender of the self, but instead allows two individuals to remain whole while still choosing each other. But the deeper realization is even more important. None of these dynamics are meant to be used as tactics or psychological leverage. When they are performed, they lose their power. When they are embodied, they become part of genuine emotional maturity. Because the qualities that are often described as what attracts an avoidant, emotional regulation, independence, depth, stability, and authenticity, are not tricks. They are traits that create healthier relationships with everyone, not just one attachment style. So, the real outcome is not about figuring out how to make someone chase you. It is about becoming someone who no longer participates in unstable connection patterns in the first place. Someone who is grounded enough to offer safety, but whole enough not to depend on it. And when that happens, relationships stop being a push and pull of fear and strategy. They become something simpler, calmer, and far more real. Two people choosing connection, not because they need to complete each other, but because they genuinely want to share their lives while still standing as individuals.